Okay, where are we here? So, slideshow. Yes, from the beginning. Okay. Okay. So, going to see if I did this right. I'm sharing the screen. I'm just clicking that. And there we go. Okay. Does everybody see the title?
Yes.
That's good enough for me. Okay. So, well, so finding old highways. Well, certainly there. We'll start with this. So basically, the plan is to cover some basics. As far as I'm concerned, this is going to be a part one. There's definitely a lot to cover, a lot of things, so just bear with me. But planning on covering C monuments or survey monuments, let's give it a broader term, different types of pavements, different things to look for as to the ages of concrete or asphalt. There are clues. Types of bridge railing, and additional stuff. There's a lot of little things that you may or may not have noticed. Some of this is old hat for some of you, some of it may be brand new. So might as well start off with survey monuments. C monuments. Speaking of C monuments, let's see. Does everybody see the monument? I can bring it closer. So this is the upper half of a C monument. This is actually from here in San Diego County, but not from a state highway. This was found broken on Del Dios Highway. So this monument itself dates back to, I believe, the 1950s. See on top here, this point here is actually a copper plug. Sometimes it extends out a little bit further, just looks like a dot. Of course, the C and the bevels. Usually, you're going to see it exposed from here up, sometimes only from here up. And this is heavy, so I'm putting it down. All right. So, okay. So, basically, starting in 1914, state started using those things. It was California Highway Commission at the time. It wasn't Caltrans, as we've come to know. Is that they had to right-of-ways were sometimes fuzzy back then. People liked, farmers, landowners, ranchers, whatever, like to move it to their favor on occasion. And the state obviously does not like that, especially when they're building more permanent roadways, like, for example, concrete. And going through all the trouble of digging it out the right-of-way. So they decided to come up with a permanent survey monument. They came up with, never really was officially named a C monument or C block, but it's a C monument. Otherwise, just simply survey monument. And they be placed always at they're always at the edge of the right-of-way, because they are right-of-way markers. So from center line of a roadway, for example, let's just go with the ridge route, original concrete. It's a 100-foot right-of-way, let's say. So if you're going to find one, the easiest way is you find the beginning or ending, and it's the same thing, of a curve. It's called a point of curve. And you go 50 feet at minimum from the center line out. Straight line out. And you'll probably find them. They'll be on both sides of the roadway because they are marking both sides of the right-of-way. but they were always at those points. And on the tangents, I found them usually about 2/10 of a mile. They are marked in all sorts of ways. So this is the article in the original California Highways magazine that when I first found this back in, was it 1998 or something like that, I was like, oh my God, that's what those things are. And it goes over all the things. It marks the exact point of the angle, the curve, point of curve. But you can see they're actually quite large. They go down because, again, these are survey monuments, so you don't necessarily want them to shift. If you shift a survey monument, bad things happen to your surveys. These are the plans for them, albeit much later, 1940, but still using them. These are actually, this is part of a set of plans for 99 in the Grapevine Canyon area. District 6, Kern County, Route 4, legislative Route 4, which at the time was US 99, and then Section A, we'll get into that. So here's the C, here's the beveling. It's actually 3 feet 6 inches. So that is only a small chunk. And we'll get to this part in a bit, but culvert markers. There's something else to look for. So sea monuments in the wild. This one actually, I believe, actually dates to the 1950s. This was found along Old US 66, 91, 395 on the, way to put it, Cajon Boulevard at Devore. At this, just beyond this marker to the right, the marker would have, or the highway would have merged into what is now Interstate 15, and then quickly thereafter Interstate 215. This is actually still used as a part of the surveys for the Devore interchange work, which was completed a couple of years ago, where the 15 was switched from being a left or a right on ramp to a left on ramp. You can see this is the standard, what I call standard exposure. This is what it's supposed to be. Here's another one. You can see the C. Yeah, it's a little bit rougher. Here's the copper plug. Here's the C. This is on US 101, San Diego County. So this one this is from the 1930s. And this is one from 1930, kind of buried into the hill. Along Old US 99 in near Newhall Pass. So this is barely Old US 99. Later it would have been State 7 or US 6, or yeah, just been US 6 or State 7. But you can see the C is fairly prominent, the bevels and everything else. So these are the monuments. Basically, if you see this, generally you're on a state highway, but the marker that I showed, that is from a county highway, Del Dios Highway. Well, in the 1950s, when the highway was built, it was built with state funds. State funds required standard state plans. Standard state plans included this sort of monumentation. So while it's not 100% that C monuments tell you you're on an old state highway, for the most part you are. There's very little times when you're not going to be on a state highway. So if you're not sure if you're on the roadway that you're on is an old state highway, there's no other clues, look for these. Speaking of looking for them, I can zoom in, but does anybody see the C monument here? Because this is just after, this is in Tohon Pass, near Cajon Junction. There was a fire, the blue cut fire, This is unfortunately the same fire that also burned down the Summit Inn Cafe on Old US 66, which I always made a point to go to. It's really sad that it's not there. But nonetheless, there it is. This is at least 100 feet from the roadway. Sometimes they're far. Now, this wouldn't have been the original right-of-way. This would have been the expansion that was done in the 1950s. And because they have, this is going through basically forest land, they could take a wider right-of-way. There is an older alignment that goes through here, but even then, this monument is way out there. So there's also this. It's not very visible here. Let's see what I can do. Oh. Does anybody see this? What looks, this is a plus block. Now, this is something that wasn't used very long. I've only seen a few in, well, in this case, Castaic Junction. I've seen a few along US 99 in, let's see, along the section between Fresno and like, what's the other town? Kingsburg, that section. What this is this is very similar to a sea monument, but it is a right-of-way access point. This was started in 1948. Expressways. This designates between, there's two of these, one here and then one would be over on the other side of the driveway, that marked where a driveway could be built to or an access point could be built along an expressway. Very not common to find. But this is at Castaic Junction. Behind was the former standard station, and the elevated roadway here is actually State 126 going over 99. So other markers, see these all the time. Benchmarks, surveyors. Now, with this, a couple of things I want to point out. They can be, these markers can be used as a way to get a rough date on a bridge. If you can't find a date stamp, we'll get to date stamps. But for example, so this is placed by Orange County. It's a benchmark. And then this here is the, in this case, this is the marker number. This is the point that they're surveying. You know, they nailed it in, and it's like, this is, that's their 0 point. This is another benchmark, but RCE 7872, that's registered civil engineer number 7872. You can find this person if you look through the records. The lower the number, the older the marker. If it's a triple digit or double digit, you've got yourself something that's probably going back to the 1930s or 1940s. Surveyors, engineers, they all had to be certified by the state, registered, following the St. Francis Dam disaster, which was March 12th, 13th, 1928. So there's a little bit of reference there. And then these are fairly common. Coast Geodetic Survey. This one is actually from 1932. As you see the date on there. And again, this is the survey, this is the point. So it's survey marker V123, dating 1932. And this is actually point that they use to mark that. Okay, so markers. Does anybody have any questions about markers? No? Okay. So concrete paving. Well, there's a lot. Obviously, you know, concrete's been used since, you know, Roman times, but how did the state use it? Well, initially, the idea for concrete was, this is a base. It's not going to be the ultimate width. We know this, but we're going to use this as a base. We at least have a solid roadway, and we'll build upon that. So initially, it may have been 10 to 12 feet. I've seen even narrower. I actually have pictures here that will show that. But generally, the really narrow stuff was prior to about 1916, really. After that, 1915, I've seen 1915, 1916 is kind of a transition. After that, things were generally wider. And yes, a full, as I mark on here, a full 20 feet. That's not very wide. An average roadway today is at least 24 feet wide, two 12-foot lanes. So with concrete, there's different styles. You have the single slab, and then you have the twin slab. Well, twin slab itself didn't just transition. So they were still trying to figure out how to handle something as simple as an expansion joint. There were many tests done. It was involved. It was a science. I mean, they're literally coming up with everything at this time. So with that in mind, 1923 to about 26, you're gonna find a different style of twin slab. If you see twin slab, and I'll show an example here, well, I'll get to that. I'll show you an example of twin slab in a moment. So single slab. In this case, this is a 20-foot slab, concrete. In this case, it's 4.5 inches thick, steel reinforced concrete. Not all old concrete is steel reinforced. The ridge route, being a major roadway, was. This is on the ridge route right near Fort Tohon. In this case, you can also see the vestige of the old center line stripe, which was placed a few years after the concrete was. This concrete dates to between 1917 and 1920. This is a little bit of a narrower slab. This is on old US 80 in the Viejas area, east of San Diego. It does terminate at this point, and if you look over here, you can see my mouse. This is Viejas Mountain. Over here, you can see some structures. This is the casino up at Viejas off of Old Highway 80. Well, this is approaching Willows Creek. And what happened is that the highway now just goes straight. But the old highway took a turn to the north off Musty Grade, and then came across here, and there was a bridge, and then it merged in right about where the casino is. So this is the old paving here, but again, this is an example of single slab. If you were to just look at this, it honestly just looks like a dirt road. But things to look for. Of course, the fact that it's concrete, plants don't go through concrete quite as readily. So you have the telltale lines. These are actually just cracks, they're not expansion joints. But you have the telltale lines, and of course, if you look deep enough, you can see the concrete. So this is on US 80. This is a 15-foot slab poured in 1914. The new highway was actually done in 1932. And in this case, this is a rare instance in California. You go to Nevada, this is standard fare. In California, it's rare that they left the old highway to the side and just built a whole new road. But in this case, it was just easier because of bridges and everything else. But again, single slab. This I'm pretty sure is steel reinforced. You can get an idea of the concrete itself. If you also notice that the aggregate is a little bit larger than a modern concrete. So yeah, this is a, well, pretty cool section of US 80, to be honest. This is between, let's see, this is between Plaster City and Coyote Wells. You can see the windmills over here. Those are over by Ocotillo. And depending on the, I'm not sure if you can see it in here, but just over here, you can, somewhere over here, I have to really look at it, is La Rumorosa, the Mexican version of US 80 climbing up out of the desert, which is, it's really quite a trip. If you ever get the opportunity, take Mexico Federal Highway 2 up and over the mountains. It's a fun ride. And then
direction is looking, Michael, what direction is this looking?
This one?
No, the one you were just on before.
This one.
Yes.
This is looking north.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
Now, here's the thing, is that this is a special bit of concrete. The plank road. Most people have heard about it. You know, it was basically a one-lane wooden roadway over the Algodones dunes in Imperial County. Well, if it's one lane, how the heck do you deal with somebody trying to get by in sand dunes? So in that case, they built an extra little bit. You pulled off like every 100 feet or whatever it was, and then you waited for the other car to come by. Well, in this particular instance, they did that with concrete. This is former US 6, US 395 in the Owens Valley. These are the Poverty Hills. Tenimaha Reservoir is over here. This is, let's see. I can't remember the name of the peak. It's not Mazurka, because that's south. But this is a named peak. I don't want to say, but this is the Inyo Mountains. That actually might be what, that actually might be Black Mountain or White Mountain right there. It might be 14,000. But nonetheless, this is a whopping 1 lane wide. So you figure it's about 10 feet, maybe 8. Between this point and this point, you notice it gets wider. They had these pullouts every few hundred feet so that people can get by. This section of, this is from 1922. It was the only section of 395 or Highway 6 395 paved with concrete in the Owens Valley. This particular section happened to get quite muddy. It's very silty in this area. As you can kind of see over here, there's actually a dry lake bed over here, but it's very silty and it was a very problematic section. So they wanted to give it a nice hard surface. So they did this. This is not reinforced concrete. I'm not sure if I was able to find any photos, but I'll show some other things where if you're looking for something like this underneath asphalt, there's signs. But you can see this is very narrow. Here's one tire track. Here's the other over the edge. So this is very narrow. This is looking south. This is looking towards, well, towards Independence. These are the Alabama hills way south. Here's Horseshoe Meadows, Whitney's down this way. So you can see 1 lane. This is this is somewhat unique. This happens to be a unique section. So this is a 1 lane roadway. Well, let's see. This is a 15-foot roadway or 18-foot roadway. I forget which. But you can see the whole roadway. Okay. So from this line, you see this line here to this line here. This was in 1922 the entire roadway. In 1927, this part, and further ahead you can see this part was added. In this case, they added a whole extra 2 feet to the roadway, making it a generous, as they call it, 20-foot roadway. And normally it stays on one side or is a strip on both sides, but in this case, it's transitioning because they were softening a curve. You can see it beginning over here and beginning over here. This asphalt itself dates back to, honestly, no later than the 40s. And if you look very carefully here, you can see white striping. Something else to look for, center line from this point then to this point, paint seems to hold asphalt together. Sometimes the paint's the only thing left, but you can see a little bit of white striping. This is US 99 out near Indian Canyon. Looking west, this is towards Mount San Gorgonio, and this is towards Mount San Jacinto. And yes, the trillions of windmills. In fact, there's the exit sign there for, and then there's the bridge for Indian Canyon. And some motorcycle parked there with Highway 99 license plates. So, widening. I'll show an example of this. This one's a little bit tougher. So, I was mentioning earlier about the narrow paving being what they called a base. Well, they meant that. That was something to build upon, not just widen. So in one instance, in the lower instance here, you see what is they nicknamed second story concrete. This was actually done on Tohon Pass on US 99. It's still there today. With the original paving being only 15 feet wide. From like 1917, well, in 1922, they came along and, or not, sorry, 1923, they came along and widened it to 20 feet. So as an example, that beautiful section of 20-foot concrete goes on for a few hundred feet at State 138 in Gorman Post Road. That's actually has old concrete underneath. So here you see 15-foot slab. So this is second story. This is the widened version. Topeka's surface was an asphalt surface, and it was there was Topeka mix, there was Willite, and a few others. These were different styles of asphalt concrete. That it was very experimental at the time. Here's an example of that top. Here's the slab, here's the widening. This is at the north end of Merced, up in the Central Valley. This isn't all that common to find anymore, but it's really cool when you see it. So you can see, if you look at the asphalt here, you notice it has a larger aggregate. So when you're looking at old highways, you see a larger aggregate asphalt, that's a clue. That is much older than, you're looking at probably 20s and 30s. Not even 30s, actually, 20s earlier. And of course, the concrete widens. So underneath this asphalt, you will find concrete. If you see this, you can easily bracket the age. The lower concrete is probably teens. You're probably looking at between 1914 and let's go with as late as 17. The widening work, you're figuring early 30s. I mean, sorry, early 20s. So there's your bracket for how old this section of highway is. Exactly, I'm not sure personally, because I have to look that up. My records are a little spotty in that area. But I can at least get a rough estimate. And that's the point. Sometimes you just need a rough estimate. I have found on occasion date stamps in the outer concrete. So look for those. So I was mentioning early twin slab. Well familiar with, and I'll advance to it just so it's, here's an expansion joint, here's an expansion joint, so on and so on and so on. You have your longitudinal, and then you have the laterals, fairly evenly spaced. Go to a modern concrete highway today, you're going to see this. On this, that's a crack. Here's a crack. Here's a crack. Those are not expansion joints. So they figured out the longitudinal, but they didn't figure out the laterals as much. On early twin slab, the laterals are much further in between. So if you're looking at if you find a section of concrete, look at that. Are there a lot of lateral joints or expansion joints, or are they just far and few between? This style of concrete, no later than 1926. By then they had things figured out. And since we're here, this is a section of old US 99. This is Tohon Pass. Here's the 5 coming down. Large aggregate asphalt. So again, you know that this is an older roadway just by that. I mean, if you look at that, that's pretty large. Look at a modern asphalt roadway, it's pea-sized. This is like small stones. They hadn't figured it out yet. So this is a section of US 80 near Wildwood Glen, and also a location known as Ellis Spring. Further up here, there's an old rest area. But you can see they have things pretty much figured out. These are 2 10-foot lanes, longitudinal, laterals. This concrete itself is from between 1929 and 1931. This is the same style you're going to find in the 40s, in the 50s. By the 1960s, you're starting to see the development of slip form paving, where these were all done by wood forms. Later, they would be done by a machine that can pave 4 lanes of freeway at once, and they saw cut the joints. And then there's this lovely section of 3-lane. Wouldn't I love to go there today and see this same site, but alas. So this is in the Tohon Pass area. This is just north of Gorman. So you have the twin slab, and then you have 3-lane. Well, this section happens to be exactly dated June 8th, 1933. And I know that date because there's a contractor stamp in this vicinity, which is now buried under asphalt. This is the north end of Gorman Post Road in Gorman. This is Fraser Mountain. So this mountain's about 8,000 feet. You see a little bit of older asphalt over here. This was a part of the Ridge Ride alternate. So these are 3 10-foot lanes. Additionally, if you look off under the shoulder, you can see an older asphalt shoulder. This is a little bit newer, but even then further on, you see older asphalt. This was either oiled or larger aggregate asphalt. These are all signs that this isn't, well, even if you don't see the concrete, you see this, that's an older roadway. So date stamps and trying to find if there's concrete. This is Musty Grade Road in the Ramona area of San Diego County. Up here you have Palomar Mountain, this Ramona. Why I took this photo, trying to find old highways, right? Well, look right here. This very defined line, and here's another defined line, and then of course the edge. Underneath here, concrete. This line here, this well-defined line shows the edge of it, paved over with asphalt. If you follow this road to the south, you will find concrete. Well exposed, looks nice. This also is the early twin slab. So expansion joints are further apart. But this is one of those things, if you're looking for an old highway, this is a clue. There's breaks in asphalt, even on a modern roadway, that was never old. But this is the clue. Generally, so between this stripe and this stripe, you're looking at 12 feet. Well, this is about 2 feet, so this is 10. And then further over, you can see there was a 10-foot roadway underneath, or 20-foot roadway underneath, paved over with asphalt, widening it out to a full 24 feet. Again, here, this is a section of US 99 in the Kela Mesa area. Very defined edge here. Wouldn't I love to see the concrete underneath here, but this is from 1926 or 7. This is twin slab underneath here with the very defined edge of the asphalt. So the asphalt is actually coming, the frontage road to the 10 is actually coming onto the concrete here. So these are things to look for when you're looking, following old highways. You're not sure where the old highway went because it's been heavily modified, it's been paved over. Look for these. Look for those that line and those breaks in the asphalt that don't follow the highway. These are clues. In this case, these are trackways. This is a portion of a former streetcar line in San Diego County, or in San Diego, where you can see this well-defined line curving off here, and this well-defined coming in here. So between these 2 points and these 2 points are streetcar tracks. It's not always old highways, but follow these clues. Sometimes when you start seeing cracks in asphalt, follow them. You never know what you might find. So that earlier section of 3-lane concrete, here it is buried under asphalt. 2 levels of asphalt. This is a basic coating, but the lanes are extraordinarily obvious. The panels are obvious. Even with more asphalt over it, you can still follow it. Things to look for. They're everywhere. You just gotta know where to look. This is in the town of Gorman, right atop of San Andreas. So that'll produce its own cracks in the future, but we'll get there. So again, cracks leading off. See this leading off here, this coming on here. So underneath here, this is leading off to the original Santa Clara River Bridge, which was eliminated in more ways than one. March 12th, well, early March 13th, 1928. The bridge was completely obliterated by the St. Francis Dam disaster, by the flood, and eventually was replaced basically a year later by the current bridge. This is not a 20-foot slab. This is a 15-foot slab that was widened. And you can see the edge of concrete here. Now, again, clues. If you notice, the asphalt is a little broken here, but still fairly solid around here. It's just beat up, but not here. Concrete base, just dirt base. Clues. Look for these, and you will find the highway. Sometimes it's a little buried. This is on Old US 6 and State 7 in Santa Clarita. This is crossing the Santa Clara River in Canyon Country. Here's a layer, here's a layer, here's a layer, and then we finally get down to the concrete. This concrete's from the teens. Actually, 1921, I believe. And this is post 1921. This layer of asphalt here is the newest it could possibly be would be 1972 when this was washed out. This is an old alignment that surprisingly still around. But you can see the layers. So the cracks coming through, it's not going to happen. But notice the style of aggregate used. Again, you can see older paving by the aggregate size. Date stamp. Where to look for these? Well, wherever you can find them, to be honest. Sometimes they're in the middle of the slab. Sometimes they're on the side. Sometimes they're circular. Sometimes they're all sorts of shapes. But these are generally marking the end of the day or beginning of the day, or when they were paving. So this was paved by Griffith Company. These were mandated by the state actually in 1920, pretty sure it's 1924. So this marks, this is the contractor, this is the date this was poured. Station, this is station 35 plus 92. This is 3,592 feet from the beginning of the section. Prior to post miles, the mileage markers that you see along state highways today, which I have pictures of, they use like I showed in the beginning with the C monument. You had county, Kern, Route 4, Section A. So this is 3,592 feet from the beginning of whatever section. Another style, like I said, they sometimes are round. This is from 1927, does not give a stationing. Older the stamp, the tougher the stationing. Generally, early 20s, I rarely have ever found any date stamps, but with newer concrete, you're going to find them. They're still stamping them today. City of San Diego mandates it even on modern curbs, so you can find something from 2021. This is another that was covered over by asphalt. This is on old State Route 15 in the Commerce area along Atlantic Avenue. This is just southeast of downtown Los Angeles. So asphalt roadways, again, relative age, it's like geology. What's the aggregate size? What's the average width of the roadway? Do you see striping? Section of US 395 at the very end, well, what is basically now the very end of 395. Current 395 actually comes over here and then proceeds through this signal here. This is known today as Outpost Road. But you can see that's a very wide roadway. This is before fog striping. Fog striping didn't really come into play until really the 70s. So this is a section that I would guesstimate it to be 1950s of this style. Center line, wide roadway, decent shoulders, and the aggregate size. Now we're dealing with much smaller, not piece size per se, but smaller. So this is generally if I didn't know, I would guesstimate 1950s, maybe 40s. This is 40s. Well, bypassed and such. This is actually paved in the early 30s, but paved is an interesting thing. This was more, they laid over a thin layer of asphalt over basically a dirt road or an oiled earth roadway. So you can see larger aggregate, narrow width, even maximum width, subtracting out, looking at maybe 20 feet. And then you get these lines in it. Now, some of those are just from modern cars driving over, but even then, you still see these lines where the pavement's breaking up. That's from how they actually poured it. Yeah, these are basically marks from cars driving over it, but also the early methods for flattening it out. This is on US 466, current state 58, east of Barstow. I mean, east of Mojave. This is the current highway today. Up and over the hill would be Boron. So Mojave is behind. And don't you just love it when you find a roadway like this? This is old US 395 in the Kramer Hills with a lovely double white stripe down the middle. White striping was standard until 61, really, and then things started shifting over. It wasn't until 1971 or 2 that the yellow striping became standard as we come to know it today. The striping that we have today pretty much was about 1972. But yellow for passing started in the California Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or version thereof, about 1961. So this is prior to 1961. In fact, this section of highway was bypassed in 1947. Current US 35 comes through here and then goes way off over here. Incidentally, this is also a easy place to camp if you're on your way to Death Valley from San Diego. But again, notice the aggregate size. Notice the same style of paving underneath here that you saw on the 1930s section. So this could potentially be 30s paving, and then of course the slightly newer asphalt over it, but larger aggregate. That's your clue. This was bypassed a bit later. Notice the smaller aggregate size, but again, white striping and even a transition here. This was bypassed in 1955. This is the Owens Valley. Looking southbound, here's Owens Lake. Here's the Sierras and the southern end of well, these are really the northern end of the Cosos. Current 395, you can kind of see some vehicles over here. But again, larger aggregate size, but notice the width. Even with the plants, this is pretty wide. Other little clues. So I'm not sure, you see this line here, and there's a faint line here, and there's another line here. So this is old US 80 east of San Diego. This is near, what's the name of that place? Well, it's not Campo. What the heck is it? La Posta. Well, here's the 8. At one point, the 8 was built in stages. So this is kind of one of those little things. This is the only section of old Highway 80 east of east of Pine Valley, where it's a long section of asphalt, and you don't see regular cracks in here either. That's because this is brand new roadway. Well, brand new. This is from the 70s. But this is actually the transition. At one point, you would have been traveling westbound on Interstate 8. The freeway ended. This section was not built yet, and you would have transitioned onto the highway here. This is the former fog stripe. This was added in later. Oops. So you can see that stripe is over here. This is the former, I believe, the former center line, and then the other edge. They just sliced it off, out the rest, but left you with a little bit of clue that the freeway ended here. If you look onto the freeway itself, you'll actually see a couple of post miles with a post mile equation. Post mile 1.2 equals post 1.4. That means they lost 0.2 miles of the roadway, and those two are now equal points. So the roadway got shorter. So yeah. Next is bridges. All sorts of types, right? start with steel. Okay, so this is a steel through girder bridge, not very common. US 99 used to have a few in the Santa Clarita area. This is actually dates to 1935 and is in Orange County on a county road. But it is a girder bridge that you actually drive through. Other bridges flip this upside down and you're driving with this all underneath. So that if you see a bridge with through girder, guaranteed it's prior to the almost guaranteed it's prior to the 30s. Well, 30s or prior. Los Angeles County used this style as, you know, at least in 1916. Now, there's also truss bridges. Truss bridges are definitely the more common one. These are known as Parker trusses. This dates back to 1930, and this is on US 91 crossing the Barstow Rail Yard. You can see Casa del Desierto, the old Barstow train station, well, still the current Barstow train station. This is a beautiful span, complete with lattice railing. Now, again, clues. So truss bridges are still used, but you see how this is done with basically this lattice work here. That's your clue that the bridge is definitely older because these are now I-beams. I-beams hadn't quite been invented yet. They hadn't figured them out. Lattice railing as well, that's another clue. You see that, you're looking at least 40s. Post 40s, that's when you're getting the transition with I-beams. This is another truss bridge with a very, also on US 66, with very nice ornate railing. Unfortunately, somebody hit it, but you can see again, lattice work here, a lot of stuff going on here. I believe this is a Pratt truss. And additionally, this concrete is newer, seismic retrofit has been done. So you have a concrete, this would be a deck girder or concrete girder bridge, truss bridge, and then concrete girder approach. And then you have a pony truss. I've seen these in wood and I've seen them in steel. Unfortunately, this bridge is no longer. This is on a county road out in the Mentony area over the Santa Ana River. This was built in 1925 and replaced 2019 or 2020. It's always sad going across that area now, but yeah, for those that are in the area, if you go just south of here, best beef jerky in that region. I may be there Friday. So this is Tohon Pass, this Cajon Pass, and this little bit here is a little bit of this might be State 330. A little bit of Rim of the World Drive visible over here. But a pony truss, this is again lattice work railing, and the pony truss is where you're kind of driving through the girders, or through the truss bridge, but there's no overhead. You know, with this bridge, you're surrounded by the structure. This, you're driving through the structure. A little different. These aren't really used anymore, so it's a clue that something's older, but notice I-beams and not I-beams. So the transition period, but 25, so. Okay, so deck girder bridges. Steel girders. Now this bridge is 1932, 1951. Ages. If you don't see a date stamp, you can get some ideas here. This is a newer span because if you notice the girder connects directly to the deck. This is the concrete deck. This has to have I-beams between. They hadn't quite figured out this connection yet. These are seismic retrofit. These were actually done back in the early 2000s. This is on US 99 over Pirate Creek. Does anybody have any questions at this point? No? Good? Okay. There'll be plenty of time for questions if necessary. Okay, so wooden bridges. They come in all sorts. This is on US 66. This bridge itself may be replaced in the near future. But if you notice, it's not unlike a railroad bridge. This is a wooden trestle. These are very common out in the desert. Now, don't let the date stamps on things fool you. You on US 66 between Ludlow and Essex on the fun section of US 66 out in the desert, you're going to see 1950s date stamps. These are not 1950s bridges. These are 1930s. These are wooden trestle and wooden deck with asphalt overlaid. You can even see, here's the deck. Here's the deck drains, wooden railing. What happened is that in the 1930 to 1932, the bulk of these bridges were built. And 20 years later, they went and rehabilitated them. Maybe they redid the railing, maybe they redid the deck. But these are 1930s bridges. So here is the deck of that bridge. Concrete. This may not have originally had concrete. Unfortunately, I don't know what the original bridge had, but this is a wooden deck with asphalt and nice wooden railing. This gap here is part of an older style approach, which is over here. It still remains over here. There would have been a wooden block here. So I'm curious if anybody knows what this bridge is.
Is that the bridge to nowhere?
You got it.
Never been there, but I've heard about it.
It's a hike. It's fun. I always underestimate it, but it's a lot of fun. So concrete arch bridges. Well, concrete bridges, they're not all arch, but point this out here. Style of railing is somewhat unique. It's not an arch. It's sort of pointed, but it's very different in style. But it's not the railing why I have chose this picture. So this bridge is 1936. Compare this to a 20s bridge. I don't think I actually have a picture of one for some stupid reason. And I can think of one right now. It's the Doney Creek or Charlie Creek Bridge, which I may see in October. But if you notice, this bridge is fairly plain. It's got the arch, definitely looks nice, but there's not that much ornamentation going on here. You look at an older bridge, if you cannot find a date stamp, there's a lot more ornamentation going on. And the railing is not always your clue. If you look underneath, more ornamentation. The newer the bridge, the plainer they get. This bridge is from 1947, and like I said, this is much more utilitarian. You have the span, you have this is an open, again, an open spandrel bridge, nice railing. This is, unfortunately, the bridge is there, the railing's no longer. This is on State 330, Old State Highway 30, over City Creek. And this is the old bridge abutment below, but you can see the bridge is still fairly plain. Then there's also just the basic spans. Now, this railing would lead you to believe this is a 1960s bridge. This is over on Interstate 5 over Gorman Creek. But again, clues. The whole point of this. If you notice, there's a slight, ever so slight arch to this. These are not straight across. This bridge actually dates back to 1948. This is old US. This is one of the few remaining bridges from old US 99 on Interstate 5. It was widened in 68. But this slight arch is your clue that there's something more to that. It's an older bridge. Otherwise, it'd just be pretty much straight across. Speaking of older bridges and Lake Shasta, so this bridge is from the 20s, 1925, and well, it's slightly underwater. So if you notice, arch railing, and again, the different style, but still slightly more ornate. And there's this guy over here, wading his way out to the end of the bridge, which you can kind of faintly see. And here's me. But sometimes you need a wetsuit to enjoy old highways. So culverts. The bridge that I showed you over Gorman Creek was not a culvert. That was an actual bridge. This is a culvert, but it's decidedly a larger one with the lovely date stamp. Now, bridges usually have the date stamp somewhere in the railing, at the end, the curb, something. Sometimes they have them on the side. Older bridges, they love to do that. They put them on the side, useless as far as I'm concerned, because for the most part, who's going to see that? Never understood that. Just put it in the curbing, put it in the dates, put it in the end. This is a 1931 curbing, or 1931 culvert. This is on State 138, just east of, well, just east of the Ridge Route in the Neenach area. You can see another little clue. You can see the wooden forms. This is before plywood. So if you see, those, obviously you're looking at an older structure, date stamp or no. But one thing that's nice is that the date is very distinct. There's a certain font that just used.
So I can ask a question?
Yes.
So the newest bridge I've ever seen that still had the slats, showing the forms that aren't plywood, is a bridge over Niles Creek up in the Bay Area near Fremont. It's from like 1947 or 48. Is that about the end of or the just before the beginning of plywood then in the 40s?
Yeah, I've seen it sometimes even to the early 50s, but it starts getting much rarer.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you also have like this. So it's not quite culvert. Well, there's a culvert here, but the reason I couldn't quite figure out where to put this. This is kind of one of those things, every once in a while you might find it. Railroad track, culvert here, but what's this? This looks like a potential, this is actually the abutment to an old bridge. Prior to the culvert, there used to be a railroad underpass here. This was eliminated, replaced with a new one, which is now to the right. I believe like 1928. This is next to Las Pulgas Road at along Interstate 5, Old US 101. It's mostly just the part of the old bridge still remains. They just left the abutment, filled in the rest. So bridge railing. This, I'm coming up with all these things that aren't here anymore. This is in Traver, the north end, pipe railing. This is a teens bridge. This is probably about 1915. Pipe railing, fairly common, teens, early teens. It was cheap, it was easy. Look at the cars back then. They didn't have much to stop. But if you see pipe railing, usually you're looking at a teens bridge or culvert or what have you. This is going over a canal, and this has 1950s railing that was added, the U-shaped railing. Though I've seen this in use as early as the mid to late 1940s. Pipe railing stopped going out, stopped being used pretty much by no later than 1920. And it was replaced by this. This is 1925. I don't know the exact term for it, but I call this faux wooden railing because this looks like it's meant to be looking like wood. It was square, offset, always had these end caps. Rare you can ever find a date stamp in these things. Look, if you see a bridge like this, look to the side, look on the girders. You will find a date stamp, usually towards the middle. This bridge is, in that case, has a date stamp in the middle. And this is former US 99, Whitewater. This is the 1955 widened in the 70s bridge on current Interstate 10, and just almost out, that's Mount San Jacinto. Deck drain. Then there's this style railing. This is a 1936 bridge. This is the Indio overhead. But this was an uncommon style. I can only think of maybe 5 bridges that are still around today that have this. It was solid. It was always like this, but it was kind of Art Deco. There's a bridge. It's not Turlock. The Calwa overhead, just south of Fresno, has similar railing, and it's similar vintage. The original bridges over at the Oildale overhead from 1933 at the north end of Bakersfield had a similar style railing. So Art Deco, that style, but we're also getting into, now they have date stamps at the end. This is actually 20s, or actually, I'm not sure. I think this is about 1930 or so at the latest. This is along State 57 in, it's getting late. Okay. It's on Highway 57 in Santa Ana Canyon. What the heck? There's a canyon. Brea Canyon. But you can see it's a little bit more ornate. Arch railing. This is a 19.
The image hasn't advanced yet. The image, at least on mine. Okay, there it is. There's a lag time on mine. There's like a 10 to 15 second lag.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Okay. So this wooden railing, now they have a date stamp at the end. So it's actually a little bit impressed in there. But now you have 1930. Now you have wooden railing. This is the fairly common style of wooden railing, but not common style of curbing. This is a style of curbing that was used only really in the late 30s. Otherwise, it's possibly even plain. This is late 30s before they figured out not to have this recess every few inches. This particular bridge is from 1939. This bridge is also from 1939. Concrete railing. Generally, you're going to find a date stamp in this, but notice kind of Art Deco styling. Recesses going all the way along. It's the Sierra Highway, old US 6 over the Santa Clara River.
So Michael, was all that the indents, was that supposed to be a sound deadening attempt?
This was actually meant to highlight the curve, so it was more obvious.
Okay.
We'll get there. So this is the railing's a little bit more open. This is pretty much a standard date at this point. Get a rough idea of the railing there. This bridge, unfortunately, is no longer there either. This is the former North Burbank overhead on US 99 with the Verdugo Mountains in the background.
What's the name of that style?
Mission style was with
Okay.
the arch. Is generally the what used for that. This is also arched. These are a little bit closer in. This is a little bit more open. And then there's this pointed version. This bridge is from, I think, 1948. Bypassed in the 50s. But you see, sometimes they had a point to them. And then there's this, 1946 date. This is known as salvage rail. This was used towards the end of the war, all the way through till I've seen into the early 50s. But this is actually railroad rail. Metal is not as is needed for other things, and so they just found scrap. And railroad rail was the best scrap that they could use for bridge rail. These are becoming much less common. This bridge is no longer has this. It's on State 79 and the Moretti's. It's Warner Springs area. And this is another style, W rail. Basically looks like modern guardrail. That was used generally 1950s. So see this? Generally mid 40s to early 50s. You see this, you're looking at 30s to the 40s, to the late 40s. By the 50s, sometimes you get the concrete railing, but then you start getting this style, this W rail. This case is 1951. And then concrete changed a bit yet more towards the late 50s, until the latest I've seen this was about 1961. It's concrete railing, but this square kind of more open. And if you notice, there's paint in those recesses. That was the plan. But this is a very narrow style that was used. This is like 1957 to 1962 tops. Very rare to see. This bridge was built in 2006. This is actually over the East Highline Canal on State 98, but was built to look similar to the older bridge. So they actually did the curbing and the metal railing looking like the wooden railing. I just thought this was cool. So, and unfortunately, I don't have that much on wooden railing. I can do more on that. This is, earlier I was mentioning about I was showing the picture with the stack of asphalt on top of the concrete. Well, that's just right here. This is an early wooden railing. It's laminated. Sometimes it was, and other times you'll find it's a solid beam. It did vary, depending on what they needed it for. With the lamination, it did help protect. It attenuated the energy a little bit differently than the solid beams. But if you see this, you're looking at 30s, most likely. They stopped using this by the 40s. So you see this, hey, that's 1930s railing. And then you have 1950s railing, this U-shaped versus the W. This was used in the late 40s all the way through till, I'd say the late 50s. This happens to be on an old freeway on-ramp, well, off-ramp, on-ramp in the North Park neighborhood of San Diego. This used to go to the Wabash Freeway or Wabash Boulevard. This was bypassed in the 70s. So curbing, I mentioned about the recesses. Well, here are all the plans. And it says, where does it say? Shaded areas to be painted. So all these recesses were to be painted. Different styles for dividing strip, island sections, how the recesses were to be done. These were at the end of the curbing. Here's your dividing strip. And sometimes they just decided to paint over the whole section. And here's your end, complete with reflectors. So the slide that had the sea monument also had a culvert marker. This is a culvert marker, not common to find, but it's just a white post, had a station on it. It's basically the location. This fiberglass thing next to it is actually a modern version of a mile marker. And then you also had section markers. I was mentioning about sections. Well, this is Modoc County, Route 210, Section A. And this is Modoc County, Route 28, Section, I believe, A. There's a white post at a section point itself. Very tough to find because these are wood and they stopped using these in the 50s. So, but this definitely tells you got something old here. And then of course you have modern bridge signs. Route 5 separation. It's the northern end of 5 Mile Grade. So you have the name, reflectors, bridge number, county's 53, bridge number, route, county, post mile. And then post mile, which these started being placed in 1964. So this is Route 5. There was a reflector here. It's Route 5, Los Angeles County, 87.00 miles. So it's 87 miles from the south end of Route 5 in Los Angeles County. These are still used today. This is just an older style. They come in variants. They look all sorts of variants, but that's pretty much the modern marker. And that's it. It went so long. So, does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for that. This is Chris. I did have a question about the C blocks. Like, how many of those do you think still exist? Because I've looked all over for them, maybe found one or two. Are they pretty? Excuse me. Are they rare in the wild, or maybe not just in Southern California, or?
I'd say they're on the order of thousands.
Oh, okay.
If not tens of thousands. They're everywhere. It's the trouble is finding them. And the one rule with sea monuments is if you find one, you find the rest. Each roadway, not even each roadway so much as each time they were placed, there was different contractor, different set of plans, different set of conditions. So sometimes you'll find them, showing the whole thing from the bevel on up. Sometimes you only find it with just the sea exposed. So if you find one and you see the height, that's generally going to be the height you're going to see for a while. And distance. Look along the fence lines. Look along, if there's no fence, where are the utility lines? They're at the edge of the right-of-way. Fence lines are usually mark the edge of the right-of-way. Some counties, like for example, Placer County, has an actual post that they put there and it has RW, and there's the sea monument. District 9 in Inyo County, or Caltrans District 9, Inyo County, along 395, they have orange poles. They almost look like snow poles. And they're you'll see them and you look, boom, there's a monument. So, and I'm finding them all over the place up on the ridge route, more so than I ever had looked before, because that roadway has been so heavily modified. So the ones that were placed, which have been placed when the roadway was first built, could well have been torn out. So they are a lot more frequent. It's just finding them sometimes can be a bit difficult.
Yeah, I think, I sent you the picture, the one right before this, and like, it's probably at most, I don't know, 8 or 12 inches above ground. It's just barely, the sea is barely above the dirt.
And sometimes that is the case.
Yeah. So it was a little bit hard to spot. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the interesting talk.
Does anybody else have any questions?
A couple of comments. So believe it or not, years ago, I made up a list of ways to find old roads, and you nailed most of them. But I also came up with a couple other ones. One of them is a really obvious one. Maybe it's not, doesn't need to be said, but when the road sign says Old Coast Highway, that's kind of a dead giveaway.
Yeah. Like
that helped.
But US 99 in the Santa Clarita area is the old road.
Yes, right. The other one is, especially on a curve, maybe, but it doesn't have to be. If you see a line of poles that look like maybe used to be telegraph poles, like phone lines or something, and then it goes off from the main road, that's usually the old road.
That's another clue, because utility lines would have followed the original alignment, or
Right.
the original alignment followed the utility lines.
Right. So those are a couple of things that I use sometimes to find them. And then just a couple of suggestions. You didn't mention anything about the wearing surface that they put on the concrete in the very early days. The 3/8 inch oil and rock. You know what I'm talking about?
I did show some of it.
Did you?
But yeah, it was. I didn't explicitly say that it was over the concrete, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of an interesting thing. They were all worried about the concrete getting worn down, so they put asphalt on top of it. And, of course, nowadays, most of it's gone, it just peels off. But there's a really good example of that just north of San Luis Obispo on the east side of that highway. You can still see that pretty clearly.
And the ridge route is chock full of it.
Yeah.
One other thing that I look for is, and I see that a lot up here in Washington State, and specifically Whatcom County, because there's some sections of 99 up there. When you see a roadway take off at a very mild angle, Y intersection, it's not always the case, but it's always worth exploring, because chances are that was an old alignment.
And there's, I think of an instance of that in near Anza on State 371, where if you're going eastbound through town, the highway bends off to the left, but there's this roadway that kind of starts going off to the right, fairly straight. Turns out it was the old highway.
And I would use that then, I use the, if the maps are available, I use the topo view mapping from the USGS, and it's got a neat little slide indicator on it. So if you pull up, say, a 1933 map, and you can slide it left to right, and it'll change the transparency of the map, where you can see, yes, indeed, the road did go that direction back in the 30s, where you can see that was the case. So that's kind of a quick verification too, if you have the opportunity to do that.
And USGS has all their maps online, and those are very, very helpful. I've gone through a lot of old topos. I mean, just the ones that I had, and then now the digital ones.
Mm-hmm.
Very helpful for finding those old highways, and sometimes it's very subtle.
So another thing about pavement, when we were talking about, you showed us some good striping examples, and had that white double line. That was very interesting. I've never seen anything like that anymore. But the single solid white line is also a way to date a road too, because of the fact that they really didn't paint any single white line after the beginning of World War II, very rarely. So that can tell you that that road was abandoned before World War II.
I have an auto club sign that I found out in the desert under a bridge from, I think it's 1936. Look it up at Bridge 36. It says no passing over double line. So it's one of those where it was when they were just starting to think, well, how do we do with passing areas?
Yeah.
And it was still double white, but yeah. A single stripe versus double, that is a very good thing.
Yeah.
Also, white versus yellow. Nevada is another section where there's some sections of old US 6 where they were bypassed during the transition years, where you had white and yellow and like two different styles happening at the same time. If you look at the movie Duel, for example, that was filmed in 1971. They're going on county roads mostly, and you can see a lot of transitions.
Mm-hmm.
There's white striping, there's yellow striping, and then there's the transition. So yeah, that's definitely another clue for years. You can bracket certain things by when just the striping. But of course, if it has that striping, then you can also look at the style of asphalt that's underneath there, or concrete. What aggregate size? That's a pretty big one too. Okay. Well, does anybody have anything else?
Nope. I'll get you those Immigrant Lake pictures as soon as I get myself organized here.
I look forward to seeing them. If you want to have one of them featured in the next newsletter of the Historic Highway 99 Association, let us know.
Certainly, yeah.
California, but
well, it's really close to California.
well, yeah, it's still 99.
That's right. It only misses California by about 15 miles.
Yeah, that's not much. Okay. I think that about does it. So I'm gonna, let's see, hit the, how do I stop sharing? Let's see, I do. Yeah, oh, that's new. Oh, stop share. There we go. Okay. All right. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Happy to cover more. There's definitely there's a lot more that I missed. There's a lot more that can be covered and maybe a little bit more detail. Try to give at least a big overview. But I do thank everybody for coming.
Well, thank you for putting this on again, Michael. Again, it's cool stuff. So more of it. I love it.
That's a tremendous detailed study that you've done. Put it all together. It's
I'll have to see what happens
make a
next
book.
month.
Yeah, no, thanks, Michael. Thanks for this. I'll look forward to the next one too.
Wow. Thank you. And I guess that pretty well concludes. So thank you again for attending, and keep an eye out on the website or on the Historic Highway 99 website, historic99.org, for additional updates for the next meeting. Also, just mentioning this, that since we are now a 501c3, if you decide to make any donations or wish to become a member, it's tax deductible. So pay less in taxes next year and become a member.
Yeah, good to know.
So thank you again, and have a good evening.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Great job.